Thanks for checking out today's video. In today's video, Harry and I are going to be talking about inflation, which is a bit of a hot topic in financial circles right now. Harry, can you explain what inflation is and why it's such a hot topic right now?
Sure, David. What is inflation? It's the government takes a basket of goods and measures how much those goods grow in a year. And they usually do that in a percentage form. And why is it such a hot topic? Well, because we haven't seen inflation grow this much since the late 90s. So we've definitely seen a huge jump in inflation compared to what we're used to. David, why is inflation at its highest level since the 1990s?
There are a couple reasons why inflation is running so high currently. The first is that we've seen a massive stimulative fiscal and monetary policy over the past 20 months throughout this pandemic. Governments around the world have made financial conditions extremely easy, and they've also spent collectively trillions of dollars on stimulus, whether it's direct payments to citizens or support for businesses, and more recently, infrastructure spending. There's lots of money supply out there in the world right now. The other reason why inflation is high is because on the supply side, there's been some issues, whether it's from shipping delays to actual manufacturing delays. One item of note that many people have probably read about is these microchips that are in everything from cars to washing machines in our 21st century lifestyle. These things are in everything, and there's been quite a shortage in production of those chips. It's starting to rectify itself now, but the last 6 months there's definitely been a shortage. So you've got a lot of demand. There's lots of money out there because of the positive or the stimulative fiscal and monetary policy, and we're having some supply issues, which leads to higher than normal inflation. Harry, should Canadians be concerned about inflation?
That's a really good question, David. Again, I wouldn't be concerned about inflation. I'd just be aware of inflation and also aware of how that inflation may impact you depending on where you are in your life. Again, the government has a lot of really good control systems that are in place. If inflation gets too high, we're definitely going to see interest rates start moving up, and that will slow inflation. So again, I don't see the government may allow inflation to run for a year or two, but they're not going to allow it to run rampant. And I think part of the problem is most people are thinking back to the 70s and the 80s when we did have inflation, and inflation actually got out of control and the government had to take some drastic steps. I don't believe that this is going to happen moving forward. Also, when you look at some of the different benefits like Canada Pension Plan, old age security, they actually have inflationary factors in them. So as inflation comes, they will actually continue to go up. And if you're a government worker, you have that in your wages as well. And even some of the private sectors, you may have to be a little more proactive with that and talk to your bosses. But I think most people are aware that inflation is there. It's a real issue, and wages generally do tend to go up as inflation goes up, David.
Yeah, for sure. And, as an investor too, as long as you have some exposure to assets that can increase in value over time, whether it's equities or real estate, most people own both. And as us in British Columbia and Canadians in general can attest, if you owned real estate in the last couple of years, your real estate values have gone up tremendously, as have your equity portfolios. So even though inflation's starting to come into the fray now, and it may feel like everything's getting more expensive, do recognize that as long as you've been invested over the past couple of years where inflation has actually been kind of subdued, you've kind of made it on the front end, and maybe we're going to, lose a little bit on the back end if inflation runs for another couple of years. But I agree with your points, Harry. I don't think that inflation is necessarily going to run out of control. And there's actually an interesting study, according to Credit Suisse Global Investment Returns, extremely high inflation, which is characterized as 18% or more, which, as you alluded to, is were the numbers that may have run in the 70s and 80s for a period of time. That is linked to negative equity market returns. But from their analysis, they've also drawn the conclusion that moderately high inflation, which is characterized as 4% to 7.5%, and we're kind of around the 4% range right now, has not been linked to negative equity market performance. So even if we do get moderate inflation running for a couple of years, it's not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of companies and businesses that can still make good profits in an inflationary environment. When we think about banks in particular, financial institutions, they actually benefit a bit from an inflationary environment because as inflation increases, interest rates will start to go up. And as interest rates go up for financial institutions, that's a good thing. It means they'll make more money on their net margin calculations and become more profitable. Same with energy companies, commodity producers. As the costs of those, hard goods increase, they're going to pass those costs on to their customers. And yeah, us as customers may pay a little bit more, but hopefully as an investor in those companies, you're also reaping the rewards of increased dividends and increased share prices. So all in all, I don't think inflation something to be too concerned with right now, but it is something to be aware of for sure, like you said, Harry. Harry, what should someone who has a bunch of cash saved up in a bank account be doing with that money?
David, it really depends on the unique situation of each individual. With inflation, if you have your money sitting in something that's low interest rate bearing, you're actually losing money by the time you've finished earnings. To give you an example, if you're earning 1% and you pay tax and inflation's running at 4%, you're losing 3+% every year on your purchasing power. So I definitely wouldn't recommend leaving that money in there for a long, long time. If you're a nervous investor, you don't like the ups and downs in the market, I would look at paying off interest rate debt that you may have, whether it's a mortgage, a car loan, something along those lines. If you're an investor that is comfortable with a little bit of volatility, I definitely get your money working a little bit harder for you into a diversified portfolio of equities. Again, depending on your situation, you have to make sure you have the right amount of time to make an investment like that. But again, that's something that David and I can definitely help you with while we update your plan and look at what to do with your money.
We hope you enjoyed today's video. As always, if you have any questions, Harry and I would love to hear from you. Feel free to give us a call.
Take care.